Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming this evening. We're really excited to have a great speaker this evening, and Benin is going to introduce them in just a minute. But I want to remind everybody that next month we will be having our UN banquet. The banquet is on October 11th at our usual time, but we'll be at the Marcus Welcome Center that evening. We have flyers up at the table where we came in, and if you want to pick up a flyer, we have a couple of those. It's also on our social media page. So without further ado, Jim, did you want to say
I'm
something?
reminded of meeting on Saturday. Usually we on Sunday, but we're meeting on Saturday. It's a Saturday.
Yeah, Saturday, October
The
11th.
Marcus Center.
Yeah, and our speaker will be Rebecca Shute, and she's going to talk about the indispensable role of international law and human rights in a chaotic time that evening. So I hope we see everybody there. Without further ado, let me introduce Benin Hyder, and she's going to introduce our speaker.
Hello. So first and foremost, thank you guys so much for coming, because this is a very important and necessary conversation that we'll be having today. This is a conversation to bring awareness and to fully understand the situation that is a little bit grim and people do not like to talk about very often, which would be human trafficking. It is also pretty rampant in our community, so I feel like it is also very important for us to be discussing it here in Wichita, especially as somebody who was born and raised here. I want to make sure that our community here knows what's going on in our own community. So, what better way than to introduce our presenter, Jennifer White, who is the Executive Director of ICT SOS, whose main goal is to eradicate human trafficking in ICT. So without further ado, this will be Jennifer White, who will be discussing what human trafficking is, what we're doing in Wichita, and what you can be doing as well.
Thank you so much. I'm going to sit my phone up here, mostly just so that I can watch the time because I ramble. So, thank you, Benin, and thank you guys for having me. I love when I get the opportunity to talk to anybody in the community, but especially people that have a heart for the work that we're doing. So I'm going to, let me see if I can't. Yeah, people know screen two. Perfect. So for those of you online, we're going to share the screen so you can see a little bit better.
There we go. So just keep on pressing. You should be good.
Perfect. There we go. Okay. All right. What's on my screen is not what's behind me. So it's a little bit of a disconnect, but we got this. So like Benin said, my name is Jennifer. I am the founder and executive director of ICT SOS, and I know a few of you have heard me speak before. I think it's been a little while, so hopefully you've either forgotten or I have new material. So I always tell people I'm like the old man at parties that tells the same joke over and over again. But we have been around since 2011. I founded the organization. I did not know I was starting a nonprofit. It was not my life plan. Somebody asked me earlier, how did I get started with this? And I always tell people the short version of the story is I'm nosy and I'm bossy. So I am not a trafficking survivor. People kind of assume that because of the work that I do, but that's not my background. I have lived in Wichita my whole life, raised my kids here. My oldest is 26, my youngest is 17. And so I've been a mom in this community for a minute now. And for me, it was kind of this realization that human trafficking was not really what I thought it was. It wasn't really what the media portrays. It's not what you see in movies and on social media. And it was affecting our community, and it was affecting kids in our community the same age as my kid. So when I first started, there was a case that kind of hit the media that the victim was about the same age as my daughter. She was 12 at the time. And so that's really kind of how I got involved. I reached out to the reporter that was covering that case and just said, you know, hey, I'm not a police officer, I'm not a social worker, you know, as a community member, is there something I can do to help? And what does that look like? Do I just need to mind my own business and go away? And obviously I didn't, because here we are. So we work with a lot of different organizations across the community, and we'll talk about some of those as we kind of go through this. Human trafficking is a really big, really complex issue, and no one organization can do everything for a survivor. And so we overlap with a lot of medical, social services, law enforcement, youth mentoring organizations. This list behind me is not an exhaustive list, but kind of gives you an idea of some of the different organizations that we do work with. I think, oh yeah, I do have Ember Hope up there for you, Shannon. So we do a few things as an organization. Like I said, we started really, really grassroots. And one of the very first things that we started doing, even before we were a nonprofit, just as kind of a community group, was prevention education. So as I started to learn more about the issue, we started meeting once a month. Before Meets Corner Coffee Shop was no longer with us. We used to meet once a month down at the coffee shop, and every month I would invite a speaker to come in. And so one month it would be a detective, one month it would be somebody from the foster care agencies, one month it would be a forensic nurse. And I thought, well, if I want to learn about this, there's other people in the community that do too. And so we just, kind of like I said, really grassroots started meeting. And as that started to grow, people started to ask me, will you come talk to my Sunday school class? Will you come talk to my book club? Will you come talk to, whatever group? And the question that I started getting asked really early on was, is anybody talking to kids about this? And we'll talk a little bit about kind of the average age of entry and sort of what that looks like. But we started looking into it, and there was nothing that was providing education around trafficking, exploitation, online safety, things like that. Again, this was back in 2012, 2013. So at that point in time, we partnered with another organization out of the DC area that had a curriculum that we started taking into the schools. We used that for several years, and over time it kind of morphed into our own thing. And then in about 2019, my education staff, because by this time we had staff and had gotten a little bigger, was coming to me and saying, hey, this video is a little outdated. This activity that isn't really resonating with the kids anymore. Can we change that up? Can we adjust this, adjust that? And then the whole world shut down, and we had all kinds of time because we couldn't be in schools. And so through 2020, we worked with a film company here in town, and we created some film content that you guys will get to see some of that tonight. And we completely revamped our curriculum. So what we have and what we take into the schools belongs to us. Which means that now the next phase of education for us will be training other organizations around the state to take it into their schools. Because we get requests to go out to Liberal, up to Hayes, Garden City, Kansas City, and I have 2 education people on my team right now, full-time and a part-time. So we stay very busy in the Wichita area, but we believe in the curriculum that we've created, and we know that that could be facilitated in other areas. So that's kind of the next phase of that for us. We also do a lot of community awareness and education. So I do a lot of events like this. We also do training for medical folks, school staff. We just did a professional development training for the middle school staff out in Goddard. I do a 2-hour block in every class of the police academy that comes through. We also do the first year med students at KU Med and the osteopathic school. We were just there the other day. So we do a lot of training for folks that, could potentially come into contact with victims, cosmetology schools. So really, I'll go talk to anybody that will listen, but we do a lot of training and education and just community awareness. And then also in 2020, late 2020, we started our adult advocacy program. So we were looking into, at that point in time, a court, kind of a specialty court program that they were doing in Ohio, where when somebody was arrested for prostitution, they could go through, if you go through the program, check the boxes, do all the things, they would drop the charges. So we started talking with the municipal court and our vice sergeant and a few other people, and kind of looking into what that could look like here in Wichita. And Dan Oblinger, who was our vice sergeant at the time, he looked at me and he said, Jen, we're not arresting the victims. And I said, oh, so we don't need to throw people into a court program where they may or may not be successful, right? You need somebody at the point of contact. And he's like, yeah, we need somebody that when we tell them, hey, we're not going to arrest you, let's get you some help. Do you need housing? Do you need a place? Do you need a meal? What do you need? We need somebody that we can hand them off to, right? Kind of that warm handoff to an advocate. And so he was really instrumental in helping us get our advocacy program up and running. And so for those of you that I spoke for the group before, this has evolved since the last time I was with you. So we've been providing adult advocacy now since 2020. We're also contracted with 4 therapists that can provide therapy for our survivors. And we work with people across every spectrum of the human condition, right? People think we only serve women. That's not the case. We serve anybody and everybody 18 and over. We've got good resources in our community for our kids, Ember Hope, the Children's Home, the Child Advocacy Center, but there is a real gap for our adult trafficking survivors. We've also got good resources for sexual assault, for domestic violence, and trafficking overlaps all of those things, but it really is kind of its own unique animal. And so our advocates, I have 2 on staff right now. One has been with us for about 2.5 years. The other one, she was our practicum student last year, and then we hired her on. We actually locked her things in her office and told her she couldn't leave after she graduated until we could figure out how to get her on staff. But she's incredible. She's also bilingual. So that's been a really great help. So we have 2 on staff now, and they work alongside our law enforcement partners, our medical partners, and really just meet people where they are. Where are you at? Where are you trying to go? How can we help you get there? And what resources can we connect you to, including therapy? And then resource coordination. We do a lot of kind of filling in the gaps of resources. So we had I don't know if any of you guys follow Family Promise. We work with them a lot for our emergency housing. We were actually able to collaborate with them on a client over the last couple of months that they were able to help move into housing. Friday, we went and got keys. And that was a really cool partnership because we helped, our advocate was working with the client. They were working with her and her kiddos for housing. And then when she got approved for an apartment, we were able to help with household items and things like that. They also had a snag with the check. They had written the check for the wrong amount and their executive director was out of town. And so they said, hey, could you make up the difference of, it's like $150 or something. Otherwise she's going to have to wait until next week to get her keys. So we're like, yep, we got you. So sometimes it's something really simple like that. My advocate was like, you're the hero today. I said, if I wish you would come to me with things that easy to make me the hero all the time, because we can't always say yes, but in that situation, we were able to do that. So we do a lot of that kind of filling in the gaps where maybe everything else is in place, but there's 1 or 2 little things that just kind of need to be filled in, and we can do that. And then a big part of that, a big part of that is what we call our fresh start bags. And we'll talk about that a little bit more too, but we do duffel bags that have brand new clothes, full-size hygiene, a fast food gift card, some comfort items. Our kids' bags have a toy and a storybook and pajamas. And then our adult bags have a journal and a pen. They all get a fast food gift card. We do those for about, I think we're up to 18 or 19 organizations now. So they go to the police department, the hospitals, the foster agencies, the DV shelters, the Children's Home, things like that. So plug, that's a really easy way to come and volunteer. And we have a whole space in our building where we have everything warehoused. Like I said, everything is brand new that goes in the bags. So it's a really easy volunteer opportunity or like donation drive project because it's very tangible. Okay, so before I flip, and I gave you a sneak peek, but before I flip over to my definition of trafficking, I want to know from you guys what comes to mind when I say that term, human trafficking. Doesn't have to be accurate. Maybe things that you hear, things that you've seen circulate on social media, what you know to be true. Tell me what comes to mind. Slave labor, yep. Yeah.
I heard at one time that Wichita was a kind of trafficking center for the Midwest.
Okay. So
Maybe you can say about that?
Yeah. So if you didn't hear, she said she's heard that Wichita is kind of a hub for this, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that. What else have you guys heard?
International students.
International students.
International women especially coming over to be nannies,
Okay.
having their passports and all their documentation taken and not being allowed to leave the home and, just trapped.
Yeah. So people coming maybe from other countries to do domestic work, right? Be a nanny, be a maid, things like that. And then documentation being held, not being able to leave, those kinds of things. What else?
Exploitation.
Exploitation. We're actually going to define that in just a second. So you're getting ahead of me. What else?
People being driven across state borders in the back of trucks.
Yep, people being driven across state borders in the back of trucks, vans, whatever else, right? Any of you guys seen some of the stuff that circulates on Facebook where it's like, I've seen, I don't know how many versions of this. If you have a zip tie on your car door, if somebody leaves a water bottle on your bumper, they're marking your car for trafficking, those kinds of things, right? That stuff circulates all the time. I get tagged in it all the time. We've never had a case of that proven. So let me debunk a couple of things for you. It's not the white van running around snatching kids out of parking lots. No matter how many times it gets posted, no matter how many times people tag me in it, it's just not what we see. We see trafficking happen within the context of a relationship. And so we'll kind of talk about how that plays out. But to that end, the statistic around, I've heard everything from Wichita's #2 in the nation to we're #5 in the country for trafficking. That doesn't make sense even from a population standpoint, right? We don't have that many people when you think about cities like, LA, New Orleans, Las Vegas, right? I usually tell people if somebody's telling you that it's a nonprofit trying to scare you into donating, we don't know where we sit in terms of kind of how we rank. I sit on the Human Trafficking Advisory Board through the AG's office for the state, and one of the subcommittees that I'm on right now is our data collection subcommittee. We're actually working with an organization out of Texas that is doing some really cool data collection work in Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Florida, I believe, so far. But we don't have a statewide database. So we can't tell you, definitively there's this many cases. Trafficking also gets kind of recorded different ways depending on if you're medical, if you're social services, if you're law enforcement. So that's one of the things that we're working on is some standardization across, the disciplines of kind of what that looks like, and then collecting that data in one place so that we have some solid numbers. So I couldn't tell you, Wichita's here, Miami's here, Chicago's here. We just don't know. So we also know that it's very, very underreported. And so typically what we know of is kind of the tip of the iceberg. So, but there are a lot of myths and misconceptions and just kind of overly dramatized things that kind of circulate around trafficking, which is interesting to me because it's terrible enough on its own. It doesn't need any embellishment, right? I got off on a whole tangent. Anyways, trafficking doesn't look exactly like what people think. It tends, though, to be a much broader definition than what people think. And so one of the things as an organization, we've kind of shifted into talking about things in terms of exploitation and what that looks like, what that means to be taken advantage of and used in different situations. And so if we look at the definition of trafficking, this is kind of we usually kind of do this in sections, but at the most basic level, we're talking about the buying and selling or trading of people, right? So whether that's in labor or in sex trafficking, we're looking at that, that buying and selling of people. We're also looking for evidence of exploitation. So somebody's being taken advantage of or used in some way. And we're looking for an exchange of value of some sort. And typically people think, especially when you talk sex trafficking, prostitution, people think sex for money. Absolutely one piece of that, but that exchange of value can be anything that has monetary value. So that can be food, clothing, shelter, a new Coach purse, a new iPhone, an Amazon gift card, right? Anything that's got monetary value. If that's being exchanged for something sexual, especially with our kids, that's going to meet that criteria of exchange of value. So we see this happen in kind of these two categories. labor trafficking and sex trafficking, right? So somebody hit on the labor piece earlier. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the labor side of things tonight. We're going to kind of hang out on the sex trafficking side of things because that's what we see more of identified in Wichita. That's not to say that labor trafficking doesn't happen here. We don't see it identified as much. Again, one of the committees that I'm on, we're getting ready to do a whole tour kind of across the state with some labor trafficking training for law enforcement across the state. But we tend to see more of the sex trafficking side identified here. But on the labor side, we do tend to see that in things like hotels, restaurants. We see it with immigrant populations. We see it with populations where there's a language barrier, where there's documentation issues. Really easy to take advantage of somebody that's undocumented. Really easy to take advantage of somebody if you're holding on to their documentation and there's language barriers, things like that. So typically when you think hotels, restaurants, things like that, it's not the front desk person, it's not the wait staff at your table, it's the person in the back washing dishes, the person in the basement doing the laundry, right? A lot of times even in big hotel chains, those things are subcontracted out. So then there's kind of one more degree of separation of where those workers came from. In Kansas, obviously, we see it in agriculture. We had a really big case out in Finney County in western Kansas, not this past summer, but the summer before, tied to some of the feedlots and meat packing plants and things. Big Hispanic population out there, a lot of undocumented folks, things like that. So, but still, we're looking for that exchange of value. Your labor has value, right? So if you're working and not being paid for it, that's your exchange, and then that exploitation piece. And then on the sex trafficking side, we tend to see this happening within what we call the commercial sex industry. So just kind of the business of sex, right? So with adults, some of those things listed behind me are legal, right? If you are over 18 and you want to have an OnlyFans page, if you want to work in a strip club, those things are legal if you're of age, right? Where this crosses into trafficking for adults is if we have forced fraud or coercion is what the statute says. We usually say forced, tricked, or threatened. It's legal to work in a strip club. It's not legal for somebody to tell you, hey, you're going to do this and you're going to bring me back the money or I'm going to harm your kids, right? So it gets really tricky sometimes to be able to prove these things out with our adult cases. And that's on our side of things as an advocacy organization. We don't have to have a criminal case, right? If a victim survivor comes to us and says, hey, this is what happened, cool, what you need, right? I don't have to have all the evidence. I don't have to have a police report, any of that. But it does get kind of tricky to build those cases when we're talking about adults. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of how that can come together. With our kids, though, we don't have to prove the forced fraud or coercion. If we have a kid that's engaged in any kind of commercial sex, if they're exchanging anything sexual for anything of value, that meets the criteria for trafficking. Even if that kid is telling you, nope, this is what I wanted to do, nobody's making me, this is, how I make my money when I'm on the run, it doesn't matter. Do you guys know what the age of consent is for sex in Kansas? 16, right? For anything commercial, it's 18. Yeah. So, two 16-year-olds, same page, everybody's good, we got consent, we're cool. Anytime it crosses over into anything commercial, though, where there's an exchange of value, that age of consent is 18. So, yeah, under the age of 18, then that child is considered the victim of a crime in that situation. Kids cannot be arrested for prostitution. They can't consent to it at that age, right? And the law kind of understands if we've got a kid engaged in these things, something's gone wrong somewhere, right? So that's kind of our definition.
It's of course a crime, but is it always trafficking?
With kids, yes. So the question was, it's a crime, is it always trafficking? If there's an exchange of value and there's exploitation. Now I'm gonna run you guys through a couple of scenarios and kind of test you on some things here in a minute. So there are definitely things that happen to kids that are crimes that are not necessarily trafficking, right? But if we've got that exchange of value for something sexual, that's all we've got to be able to prove with a kid. And this is the statute if anybody's interested in reading it. One of the things that's interesting to me is it includes transporting. So you can be arrested for trafficking if you are transporting somebody from point A to point B, knowing that that's what's going to happen to that person. In fact, one of the first cases prosecuted in Kansas, that's what they got the guy on, was transporting a minor for what he knew to be prostitution. He asked the DA, "I'm gonna go to jail for giving her a ride." He said, "Yep, you sure?" Okay, we'll see if our video plays. So this is Jason Hart. He's one of our federal prosecutors. You look like you're a little hesitant that the sound's gonna work. We're gonna find out. It'll play through my computer, so hopefully it'll pick up on the mic if it doesn't play through the thing. Jason works for the U.S. Attorney's Office and prosecutes a lot of our cases with our kids, so he'll explain this a little bit more in depth.
At its most basic level, human trafficking is the buying and selling of people, typically for sex or labor, and that's how we frequently.
Sorry, Jason. You have the other one.
Oh, Diet Coke. Sorry.
At its most basic level, human trafficking is the buying and selling of people, typically for sex or labor, and that's how we frequently see it. There's always an exploitation component to it, and by exploitation, what I mean is using someone, taking advantage of them. This is not your normal business relationship where two people agree on a wage and you get paid by the hour and you can keep track of this and all these things. This is, I'm taking advantage of you for the purpose of their economic benefit and taking all of that resource and all that money and pocketing it themselves. There's two types of trafficking. Labor trafficking we most frequently see in hotels or restaurants or on farms. Sex trafficking is a sexual act in exchange for a thing of value. That thing of value, it doesn't just have to be money. It can be shelter, it could be food, it could be a new smartphone or technology, it could be drugs, it can be any of those things. It's most frequently money, and that's what we frequently think of it, but it incorporates a whole bunch of other things. What we see locally is folks entering in at about 13 and 14, but we will see ages that range anywhere between 14 and 17. I think we've had as young as 12 getting involved, where folks have reported their first commercial sex experience, and they don't refer to it that way, but the first time that they did sex in exchange for a thing was when they were younger. I want to make sure that we're clear that not all commercial sex involving adults is going to be illegal. So for instance, pornography, which adults can do, is legal. It involves sex acts, folks having their pictures taken while they're naked or making movies of things, and they're getting paid for it. That is legal in the United States. So is stripping, but those are only for adults. If a child is made to be involved in this or gets involved in that, that is now illegal. Where pornography and stripping become a crime is for adults is when force, fraud, or coercion, trickery, threats come into play. So when we talk about sex in exchange for value, it's most what we commonly think of as prostitution. So where a person is engaging in a sex act in exchange for money, that's an act of sex trafficking. That will fall within that category of crime. But to be clear, the minor is a victim in that scenario. They are not the perpetrator. The perpetrator is the person that arranged the minor's participation in this, the person that advertised the minor's participation, the person that transported the minor, knowing that this was going to happen. And it's also the person that pays for it. So when we think of prostitution, we think of, well, the prostitute themselves. That's the trafficked person, the victim, or survivor, if you will. And then we also have the other two components, the John or the buyer who's committing the crime, and the person that set up the commercial sex act, the pimp or the madam, whatever you want to call them. Those folks are committing the crime, and the minor is the person that's being trafficked. Now, I want to be clear about something. While the minor cannot be charged with prostitution, if you have a minor that is pimping somebody else out, that's a minor or an adult even, that person could be charged because they're not the victim in that situation. They're actually a perpetrator taking advantage of someone else. when we go to prove up a charge of sex trafficking, a couple of things that we're looking at. For adults, what we look at is whether there's force, fraud, or coercion. The way that we typically would think of this is the use of force, threats, or trickery. The way you might think of trickery is the person says, hey, it's going to be a modeling shoot, so take off your outer clothes, and actually now it's going to be take off all your clothes, and now we're doing this modeling shoot. No, now there's a sex act. And so that would be a form of trickery. Force, as we think of it, is when somebody's pounding on somebody or holding a gun to them or things like that. Threats can be to the minor themselves or to the adult, or they can be a threat to harm someone else that's close to the minor or the adult. So, for instance, threatening the adult's child would be a way to accomplish this. Now, something that's important, force, fraud, or coercion, or force, tricks, or threats are not required to prove sex trafficking of a minor. To prove sex trafficking of a minor, we simply need to show that a minor was engaged in a commercial sex act. For the minor in the federal system, if you traffic a minor, you're looking at a minimum of 10 years and up to the rest of your life. It is a significant penalty. And that makes sense because we're dealing in human beings, not little bags of dope. When it comes to the trafficking that's involving force, fraud, or coercion, or tricks or threats, that then moves it up to a mandatory minimum of 15 years. And just to be clear, that also has a lifetime, a potential for life. And when I say mandatory minimum, that's the least that you're going to get. It's frequently, and in the cases that we've had around here, much more like 25 to 30 or 40 years for folks that involve themselves in this sort of activity. And that is involving themselves with minors in particular, where there's no force, fraud, or coercion required. They're still getting lots of time.
He's going to go on to talk about victims, and we'll talk a little bit about that. He's a lawyer. He likes to hear himself talk. We love him. I drag him into the schools with me, and the kids are like, who's the nerdy white guy in the bow tie? And then he has zero filter. And so I don't know how many schools I've been in where I'm like, Jason, you're going to get us kicked out of here. And then the next year when the school schedules, they're like, are you bringing back the bow tie guy? Don't encourage him. So he's fantastic. Okay, so a couple of things that I want to show you guys on sort of what this looks like. So this is a heat map, and it's a little bit older from Polaris, which is who runs the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Now, one thing, this is not direct correlation to cases, but this is a heat map of calls into their national hotline. So this is a silly analogy, but I always tell people it's kind of like, you know how Butterball Turkey has a hotline at the holidays? You might call in and say, how do I make a turkey? And they tell you, and you're like, cool, I'm going to make a turkey. You might call in and be like, I'm going to make 10 turkeys. And you might call in and say, that's too hard, I'm ordering Chinese, right? So a call doesn't equal a case, but it does kind of show us where we see activity, where we see calls coming in from. And so if you look at Kansas, you can see where, Wichita and Kansas City are on there. And then if you think about our definition, you do not have to move a person from one place to another, excuse me, for something to be trafficking. You could be trafficked in your own home. Angela, can I tuck you into a glass of water? Allergies, I promise I'm not sick. Thank you. He's on it too. But we do see movement happen, and you can kind of see, I'm going to wait on him because I'm going to set myself up again. Whoever mentioned the ragweed earlier, thank you. Thank you so much. Psychosomatic symptoms up here. Okay, I think we're in business. You can see where people kind of move around, especially here in the Midwest. We see kind of that movement from here down to like Oklahoma City, Tulsa, down to Dallas, back up to like Kansas City, Chicago kind of background. I'm so sorry. if you think about how traffickers see the people that they're exploiting, you're so kind, thank you. If you think about the way they see the people they're exploiting, they see them as product that they're moving around from market to market, right? So we see the movement happen for the reason of staying ahead of law enforcement and, you know, them not kind of being able to catch up with them. But then also they're moving product around to a new market. I promise I will survive this presentation. So some things to look for, especially with our kids. If you've got kids that all of a sudden have new things that you know that they don't really have a way to afford, they've got new technology, they've got extra cash, you're seeing a change in behavior, a change in who they're running around with, things like that. None of that necessarily means that they're being trafficked, but you start putting some of those things together, right? And start kind of piecing together what the situation looks like. One of the activities that we do in the schools is we talk about the stereotypes and what this looks like. And we actually write out, you know, kind of each of those three people that Jason described, right? Our victim, our buyer, and our pimp or trafficker. And we talk about what are the stereotypes, which, by the way, 7th and 8th graders still think that pimps look like the pimp from the 70s with the purple suit. And that, I don't know why, it doesn't matter what classroom I go into, that's the picture they come up with. But when we talk about our victims, we get this very clear picture from almost every group of young, female, you know, scantily dressed, all the things. These people look like us, right? So you're not going to see somebody with a flashing neon sign over their head that says, hey, this is what's happening. But when you start putting together some of these situational things, some of those things should throw up some red flags. Tattoos are a really interesting one. It's also a really interesting way to start conversation. When I do training for law enforcement and medical, it's one of the things that we talk about a lot because it's an easy conversation starter. Visible tattoos are much more common than they used to be. And trafficking tattoos tend to be very visible. They tend to be on the neck, the hands, the face, things like that. And so again, just because somebody has visible tattoos does not mean they're being trafficked. But sometimes picking up, knowing what those tattoos look like and picking up on some of those cues, asking some questions, pairing those with some of the other things going on, you can start to get a picture of what somebody's situation is. Here in Wichita, we see a few things. We see the word loyalty a lot. It's tied to one of the gangs. We also see the 5-point crown a lot. We see a lot of money symbology, things around that. So, and then things that are like, you know, daddy or property of so-and-so. One of the things that we get to do as an organization that is super cool, we work with a couple of tattoo artists here in town that do cover-ups for us. And here recently, we've done a couple. We had a client a while back that had somebody's name shoulder blade to shoulder blade across her back that we helped her get covered. She's been out of that life for a long time, but when you walk around with that reminder, you know, constantly on your body, it's really hard to move away from that. So that's one of the really cool things that we get to help out with. Again, some kind of common terminology. You're not going to have somebody walk up to you and be like, hey, I'm being trafficked, right? Or I'm being commercially sexually exploited, whatever the, you know, the legal term is. So some terminology that we hear people talk about being in the game or the life. We hear a lot of, again, this happens in this context of relationship, right? And so a lot of times our victims and survivors, the people that they were trafficked with have become this almost familial type relationship. So you'll hear wife or wife-in-law, things like that. They're not married, but that's just kind of the relationship that's been created, or husband or daddy or baby daddy, even if they don't have a baby together. So some of those kinds of things. There's also a whole language of emojis, and it's wild. So our victim profile is really kind of all across the board, right? So like I said earlier, people kind of assume that we only serve women. We've had male victims or survivors, we've had transgender folks that we've served. It's really kind of all across the board. But what we do know is that there are some vulnerabilities that make it easier to take advantage of somebody, right? So poverty, past history of sexual abuse is a big one. Our kiddos that are on the run, that are constantly missing school, running from care, running from home. You have to think about when a kid goes on the run, where are they staying? How are they providing for their basic needs, right? How are they eating? Things like that. And what we see is not the white van snatching people. We see somebody that's like, hey, you can come crash on my couch. I got you. No big deal, right? Now you've been here for a little while. You've been eating my food. You've been staying at my place. You kind of owe me something, right? And it's kind of this gradual transition into that. And then we see those vulnerabilities within families and systems as well, right? So again, poverty, abuse in the home, drug use, things like that. We've had cases that are, a kid from an upper middle class, great home, doing well in school, and they just got hooked up with the wrong guy on the internet. So it's not just somebody that's, highly vulnerable in these other ways, but those things do make it easier for somebody to take advantage of and exploit somebody. Touched on that. So some of the common questions that we get is, does this happen here? And then, where do you find victims? What do they look like? How do we identify them? Yes, it happens here. The comment about, Wichita is number 2 in the nation, we're number 5, whatever the number circulates. The comment that I hear with that all the time is, well, we have highways that come through here, right? We have 35 that goes through one way, and I-70 is not too far from here. So does every city in the country. That's how highways work, right? That's how we get around the country. More and more of this is moving away from the in-person initial grooming process and online, moving into that online space. So yes, there's still some truth to, it's easy to move in and out of our state. In any direction, you can be in or out of Kansas in a few hours, right? There's still definitely some truth to that. But the way that the grooming process is happening is changing. I told a group the other day, I'm old, so we used to hang out at like the skating rink in the mall and it's like, don't talk to strangers. Well, guess what? Now we carry the strangers around in our pocket, right? So yeah, it's just shifting. We kind of talked a little bit about, that stereotype piece. We do see this a lot with our homeless and runaway kids, our kiddos that are in the foster care system. And I feel like, and I'm not just saying this because you're here, Shannon, but the foster care system gets a little bit demonized for this. Foster care is churning out trafficking victims, right? What landed that kid in foster care to begin with? What trauma did that kid already come in with? What breakdown in the family or in their structure, in their world happened long before they ever ended up in care, right? Those are the same vulnerabilities that a trafficker is looking for. Most of the adult survivors that we work with come from a history of complex trauma, generational trauma in their family, sexual abuse, physical abuse, domestic violence in the home, things like that. So the foster care correlation is kind of a chicken and egg thing, right? I think it's unfair to say that, being in foster care makes you more vulnerable when the things that put you in foster care made you vulnerable. Does that make sense? I'm just talking in circles now, aren't I? But the statistics kind of bear it out that, it's interesting to me because I always thought, if somebody was victimized in one of these ways once, it'd be really hard to victimize them again. And it's the exact opposite, right? Once somebody has been victimized, it's really easy to re-victimize someone. And so we see that a lot. And then our offenders are all across the board as well. We have had cases where the trafficker is our family, where they're somebody that a coach, an acquaintance, a boyfriend, a girlfriend. Same thing with buyers. We've had buyers all across the socioeconomic spectrum of our community. We've had lawyers, doctors, pastors, coaches, teachers, all across the board. skip through a little bit of this. So, like I said in the beginning, one of the things that we do is prevention education. So we spend a lot of time in the schools. We have a curriculum that we take into middle school, and then we have a curriculum that we take into high school. So with our middle schoolers, we talk a lot about healthy and unhealthy relationships. We talk a lot about online safety. Almost all of our cases with our kids start online. So we spend a lot of time talking about that, and I'll show you some numbers coming out of the pandemic here in just a minute too. With our high schoolers, we dig in deeper to what is trafficking, what does it look like, what does the law say, we go through that definition with them, because what a trafficker is going to tell somebody, or a pimp is going to tell somebody, is, well, you've been involved in prostitution. If you go tell somebody, you're going to get in trouble, you're going to get arrested. We want them to understand what the law says so that they know that that is not the case, and that they can go and talk to somebody and tell somebody, and that if they have a friend that's in a situation like that, they can convey that information to them as well. A lot of the way we come at this with our kids is, I know you're smart enough to not fall for this stuff, but if you ever had a friend that was in a tough spot, would you know how to help your friend out, right? And then, oh, look, we snuck the information into you too. So what I have found though is our kids are much more empathetic than the world gives them credit for. They're much more compassionate. They want to be good friends. They want to look out for each other. They just don't know how. Nobody's ever had that conversation with them. So that's what we try to bring in. So I'm going to walk you guys through a couple of the scenarios that we take into the high schools. Some of these are a little difficult to watch. I'll just give you that warning. They don't show anything. There's some things implied. I always like to tell people, make sure you take good care of yourself after this. Sometimes it's a little heavier than you realize, and it'll catch up with you later. But we'll watch the scenario, we'll talk through a couple of questions, and then we'll talk about what the resources are that relate to that scenario. So we'll go through a few of them. And I'll try to keep us on time.
My parents kicked me out of the house because I'm gay. I'm too afraid to talk to my friends or anyone at school. I have nothing, nowhere to go, nothing to eat. So I did what I had to do.
So based on our definition that we kind of ran through, would you guys consider this situation to be human trafficking?
Depends on what age.
Depends on age. So how old do we think she is based on context?
17.
Still in high school, right? So probably under 18. So if she's under the age of 18, then is this situation trafficking? Yeah. Do we have an exchange of value? Yeah, what's that? Sex for a sandwich, right? Yeah. And maybe a place to stay. And then is she being exploited? Is she being taken advantage of? For sure, right? Yeah. So when we talk through this one, and I'm going to buzz through these a little bit quickly just for time tonight, but when we talk through this one, we'll ask who could be charged. A lot of times people will say the dad. The dad cannot be charged with trafficking in this one, maybe the neglect or abandonment side of things, but he's not actively trafficking her. But who could be charged?
Customer.
The buyer, right? Yeah. And this one's one that kind of trips people up because they'll say, well, there's not a pimp, there's not a trafficker, nobody's holding a gun to her head or forcing her to do anything. She's kind of doing this to herself, right? Doesn't matter. she's under the age of 18, we've got an exchange of value, she's being taken advantage of, this meets our criteria. This is probably one of the most common forms of trafficking that we see with our young people, right? So in this case, she gets kicked out because she comes out and dad's like, nope, you gotta go. This could be a fight with mom. This could be, you know, she didn't get along with the foster parent she's placed with. For whatever reason, now she's out on her own. And probably didn't happen that, you know, she got kicked out this morning and by this evening, this is what she's doing, right? My guess is she couch surfed for a while. She stayed with a friend or she stayed with, you know, somebody she knew. At some point, though, she ran out of resources or ran out of the resources that she knew. And so when this guy comes along and says, you know, hey, I'll get you something to eat. Sounds pretty good if she hasn't had any food for a couple of days or she's been sleeping in the park or whatever, right? So again, it's not the creepy white van, it's not the Hollywood version, it's not Liam Neeson, right? It's much more subtle than what people think, and it's much more common than people think. So couple of resources here, especially when we go into the schools, we always try to make sure that the kids know about Safe Place. So have you guys seen the Safe Place sign around town? Do you know what it is? Some of you do. So I had a kid one time was like, isn't that where you can drop babies off? No, don't drop your babies at Quick Trip, please. Right? I mean, I guess if that's the safest option, but no, any place that has a Safe Place sign, Quick Trips, the libraries, the bus stops, police stations, the YMCAs, McDonald's, yeah, anywhere you see that Safe Place sign. Anyone, I think it's 24 now, 23 or 24, under that age can go in and tell somebody, hey, I'm not safe. They'll call the Safe Place hotline and they'll send an advocate out to meet with them. You can also call or text the Safe Place hotline directly. You don't have to walk in physically to someplace. Here in Wichita, the Safe Place hotline is staffed by 4 or 5 advocates through the Wichita Children's Home, through their Crossroads Homeless and Runaway Youth Program. And they will literally 2 a.m. Christmas Eve on, you know, Kellogg and Broadway, doesn't matter, 365, 24/7, they'll go out and meet with somebody. They could help her safety plan. They could help her figure out, they have emergency overnight beds. Maybe dad's not a bad guy. Maybe dad, you know, or mom or whoever she had an argument with, that's something that could easily be smoothed over. We could get her back home. Maybe dad's not safe and he's not ever going to be safe. So now what's our option, right? And they can help her think through and safety plan and kind of figure out what's next for her. And then on the adult side, we have the Sexual Assault Center. And one of the things that we talk with the kids about with this is that they are not mandated reporters up to a certain number of times. Mandated reporting is very important, but it's also a barrier sometimes to somebody telling somebody, or even kind of like dipping a toe in and asking, well, what would happen if I told somebody what was going on? And so they serve all ages, so above that 23, 24 age range, but then also the fact that they're not mandated reporters, sometimes that's a little easier. Get a little bit of information, ask a couple of questions, kind of figure out what the game plan looks like before you go and tell a teacher or coach or somebody like that. Any thoughts or questions on this one? Okay.
voice.
That's the point in class where all the kids go, ooh. I say, yeah, stop talking to strangers on the internet. Okay, based on our definition, what do you guys think? Is this one trafficking?
Yep.
At least I'm getting that information.
It's actually not trafficking. Is there a crime being committed here? Yes. Yeah, so this is gonna fall under online exploitation of a child. Do we see how it could really easily slip into trafficking? Right, we're missing that exchange at this point. There's no value being exchanged, right? But the minute he sends her a gift, sends her money, anything along those lines, then it slips over into that trafficking side. Still a crime. I've had people get really mad at me when I'm like, this isn't trafficking. They're like, but it's wrong. It's still a crime, just not that one.
It's not.
No, because there's no, so it's, yes, from the online exploitation side, but for it to meet the nexus for trafficking, we've got to have that exchange of value. So yeah, this guy can still go to jail for a really long time for this. But it doesn't meet that criteria yet for trafficking. But we could see how this really easily slips into that, right? He starts sending her gifts. He tells her, you know, if you don't meet up with me somewhere, I'm going to post this stuff. This goes real south real fast, right? So,
I have a question.
yeah.
So, when we're talking value, we're talking sandwiches. We're not talking, exchange of human value or loss of human value that girl would feel.
Yeah, so let me repeat what you said. So for those that didn't hear him, he said when we're talking about the exchange of value, we're talking about things like sandwiches, things that have monetary value, not the exchange of human value. Right, yes, for it to meet the criteria for that particular crime. Now, there's all kinds of other things that this stuff can fall under. We've had trafficking cases that were charged as rape or other things because they couldn't maybe have all of the pieces in place to make a trafficking charge stick, but they knew that it would fall under these other things and they could still get the same amount of penalty. Does that make sense? And I would preface this with I am not a cop or a lawyer, so this is Jen's understanding of the things, right? But yeah, for it to be trafficking, we have to have some sort of tangible monetary value. So like that sandwich, you can't walk into Subway and just take a sandwich. You got to give them money for it, right? So it's got to be something that we've got some sort of monetary value for that exchange piece. Yeah. Uh-huh. So talking about kind of, like I said, this has really moved into this online space. Immediately after the schools shut down, we saw a huge uptick in online exploitation, which makes sense, right? All of a sudden, kids are home, they're online, they're unsupervised because the adults are running around with their heads on fire trying to figure out what we're doing, right? Go play on your iPad and entertain yourself for a while. So the numbers that you see this March and April, the way the reports come in to be investigated, they go to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So every online platform that has a messaging component also has to have a report function. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, if you can private message, you can report if something's amiss, right? So those reports go to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And then they kind of filter through them and try to figure out, okay, which of these have a nexus with Kansas? We think the victim is in Kansas. We think the perpetrator is in Kansas. Somehow there's a tie to Kansas here. That gets sent to our Internet Crimes Against Children unit. And then they triage through and figure out what, kind of order to investigate those in. So these numbers behind me, that happens every 7 days. So the March and April numbers, those are a 7-day chunk nationwide in each of those months. Right, so that March 2020 number is what, about 380,000, and then over 1 million in April. Well, the schools shut down in between there, right? So we saw this immediate uptick in online exploitation reports, and it has stayed really high. It's not doubling and tripling over month after month, in the 5 years since, but it has stayed high, and it was a trend that was already moving in that direction, and COVID just kind of, skyrocketed it. Perpetrators know that that's where our kids are hanging out. That's where they were finding connection, because there was no sports, there was no band, there was no theater, there was no youth group, right? So where was their opportunity to connect and talk to somebody? It was online, right? Oops. So let me go back. Like Jason said, that kind of 12 to 14, and that 21 number is really old too. So far this year, our detective that works our trafficking cases has investigated, I think, 67 cases that involve minors. And about 30 of those have become cases that she's actively working. That 12 to 14 number that he cited earlier, when I started doing this, that was kind of the national average, was about 12 to 14. Here in Wichita, we were seeing it about 14 to 17, so a little older. Now our detectives are telling us it's probably more around 10 to 13 based on what they're seeing. So that age is getting younger and younger. So like I said, we're in middle schools and high schools. We are probably the next phase of things looking at dropping down into upper elementary. Obviously not talking about trafficking, but some of those online safety things and those pieces. So that grooming piece happens across all of those online platforms, online gaming, chat rooms, all the different social media platforms. There's been a lot of stuff circulating here lately. We've had a couple of cases, and there's been a couple of kind of cases that have hit the media nationwide around like Roblox. And so people are like, oh, Roblox, Fortnite, anything that's got a messaging component, we've had cases out of. So just kind of like I said, highways run through every state. Every online platform that has a private messaging component, we've had cases out of with our kids and our adults. So couple of really good resources here. Like I said, all of the platforms have a way to report, but if you don't want to report through your own account, or especially like when we're talking with kids, if they don't want to report through their account, you can report through the cyber tip line, which is completely anonymous if you choose to be. Goes to the same place. It goes to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Crime Stoppers, or in the schools at Speak Up, are also some ways to report anonymously. So we always try to make sure that they know about those. Obviously, best case scenario, they go to a parent or a trusted adult, a teacher, coach, whatever. But if they're not going to do that, we'd like them to at least report somewhere. And one of the things that I think is really cool about getting the opportunity to talk to kids about this is that they have some power and control in this issue in a different way than we do. They see things online that we don't see because they're in spaces that we're not in, which gives them the power to report things that we may not see. I always tell them I'm boring. I post pictures of my dog and my lunch, right? I'm not seeing the same things online that they're seeing. So I don't have the same power that they do. So it's not always about, well, we don't go in with the boogeyman's out there to get you and here's how you stay safe from the boogeyman. We want them to hit back at the boogeyman, right? And they got a little bit of power to do that in this way. All right, I got two more for you. I got these last two are out of order. Oops, 1, 2, 5. This one doesn't want to start for me. I lost my. Okay. Oh, there we go.
Your name?
Nicole Rodriguez,
Nicole, how old are you?
20.
What happened? You want to tell me how you got here?
This really cute guy followed me on Instagram and he said he knew a couple of my friends. So we started chatting. About a month later, I gave him my number and we would talk all the time. I felt like I'd known him forever. So I wanted to finally meet this guy, but my parents keep treating me like a child. I'm almost 21. He was so sweet and paid for my gas to come all the way here. Those first 2 days, they were so romantic. He spoiled me with clothes, took me to get my nails done. My parents would never let me dress this way, but I felt pretty and happy. And he took me to a club. At first, I thought we were just going out to a party, but then he forced me on the stage. And he said if I didn't strip, he would throw me on the streets. I don't know anyone here, and I'm broke. I don't have anywhere to go, and I'm afraid to call my parents. I don't think they'd let me come back home after this.
It's okay. You're okay. You're safe. And we've got a bed for you tonight, and I just really think that you should get a good night's sleep, and tomorrow morning then you can decide what it is that you want to do, okay? All right.
All right, so this is our first one where we've got somebody that is not a child. So based on our definition, what do we think? Does this meet our criteria for trafficking? What do we have to prove for an adult? Coercion. We gotta have the exchange and the exploitation. Force, tricked, or threatened, right? Force, fraud, or coercion. So do we have any of those things going on? She was coerced, right? Yeah, the whole relationship was coercion, right? And even when they go out for the night, he tells her they're going one place and they go someplace else, right? She says he forced me on the stage, right? So we kind of got all three. We only have to be able to prove one, but we've got all three going on. So like I said earlier, that can be really tricky sometimes to prove with our adults. So in a situation like this, we've got Instagram messages, right? She said that's how they were talking initially. There's probably receipts from him sending her money for gas, those kinds of things that they can kind of pull together and put a case together. So this does meet that criteria for trafficking.
Well, dress, right?
Yeah, he bought her clothes, he got her nails done, all those kinds of things. So yeah, we got all kinds of exchange of value. He sent her money for gas, all those things. So this is the kind of situation where we could step in with the advocacy piece. So let's say this girl came here from Chicago, right? And she finds herself here. She doesn't have any money. She doesn't know how she's going to get back home. That's the kind of thing that we could help with. We could help with transportation to get her back home. We've helped with situations like that. We could get her, put up. We have a program where we can put somebody up in an emergency hotel in a vetted hotel under either an alias or completely anonymously for a couple of nights. So, we make sure she's got food for a couple of days, make sure she's got a fresh start bag, that she's got clean clothes and things. And while we get that piece together and get her back home, or let's say she's from here and something like this happened here, that's where we could kind of come in and help her figure out, okay, what kind of things do you need? What supports do you need as you go forward? All right, I got one more. This one I will warn you, I think is the hardest to watch. It's the shortest, but it's also a little difficult to watch. All right, again, based on our definition, is this one trafficking? That was very cut and dry, right? We've got an exchange of value, we have a very young victim, he's clearly being taken advantage of. We got all the pieces in place, right? So exchange of value is what? drugs, right? Yeah, he handed mom drugs when he came in. Our victims and survivors don't a lot of times self-disclose. They're not running into police stations and saying, help, help, I'm being trafficked, right? A lot of times it is putting those pieces together and kind of seeing what's going on and piecing the situation together. But thinking about this kid in this situation, what would make this maybe even harder for him to tell somebody what's going on with him? It's his mom. What's hard about that?
Well, he's a boy, he probably feels responsible for it. And
Because so
she go to jail.
she said he's a boy, he might feel responsible for her. She's gonna go to jail if he tells somebody. Yeah, what happens to him at that point? His whole world changes, right? One way or another. Kind of looks like it's him and mom against the world, right? So if mom goes away, everything changes for him. What else about this being mom might make it hard for him to tell somebody?
Embarrassment,
Shame.
fear.
Shame, fear, embarrassment, and I would say that's accurate across all of our scenarios, right? Probably even more so for a kid. If mom is the person that's supposed to be taking care of me and I can't trust mom, why would I trust anybody else? Right? He's also very young. Maybe this has been his norm, right? He may not know that this isn't how other families operate. You think he loves his mom? I bet he does, right? It's really easy for us to sit back and be like, man, she's terrible. Still mom. I guarantee you he still loves her. Right. So there's a lot that gets wrapped up in this when this happens within families or, with somebody that is a caregiver, that's another level of that kind of betrayal of trust. And then you mentioned that he's a boy. What about the fact that he's male makes this more difficult for him to tell somebody?
Violation of the rule.
Say that again.
It's a violation of gender role.
It's a violation of the gender role. Tell me more about that.
Well, boys are supposed to be strong, and they're also supposed to be the assertive one in sexual relations. So here he's being weak and submissive.
So I'm going to repeat what you said before I forget it. He said boys are supposed to be strong. They're also supposed to be the aggressor in sexual situations, right? And here he's neither one of those things, right? He's the weaker of the two. He's the submissive of the two. Yeah.
He also is likely to imagine that he might have thought of as homosexual.
Right. Perpetrator is also male, right? So am I gay? Does that make me gay? Are people going to think I'm gay? What if his body reacted in a way that he didn't have control over? That's pretty confusing, right? So a lot of things that go into this for our male victims and survivors. It happens within families much more than people think, and it happens to boys much more than people think. And the thing that I always try to encourage people, especially when I'm talking to like medical professionals, law enforcement, things like that, if all of the red flags are going off and you would ask the questions of a girl and it's a boy, ask the questions, right? When we first started doing our Fresh Start bags, one of the places that we do them for is the Wichita Area Sexual Assault Center. And initially we only did, and we do kids through adults, male and female. We only did women and girls bags for them. And about a year or two in, they called us and said, hey, we're having more guys come forward and disclose. Will you guys do male bags for us as well? Yep, we got you. So I feel like I hope it's becoming more and more acceptable for men to come forward and disclose these things when they've happened. We know that a lot of times kids don't disclose for a very long time. We know guys don't disclose for a very long time. I come from a family that has some sexual abuse history, not my generation, but the generation above me. And all of the siblings were abused. None of them, male and female, none of them knew it was happening to their siblings because they all thought they were protecting the others. And so none of that got disclosed until they were in their 30s and 40s. So, when we hear things like, well, why didn't they just tell somebody? This is why, right? How hard is that for this kid? So Couple of really good resources here. Our forensic nurses, great resource across the board. So they do the sexual assault exams. They also do elder abuse, child abuse. They can take forensic photos. They can take evidence, all the things. The thing that we always talk to the students about with them, though, is everything with them is patient-led. That means that the patient gets to decide, you know, I want to go in and get tested for STDs, but I don't want you to take any photos. Or I want you to do all the things, collect the evidence, let's go get this guy, right? Or for adults, if they're over 18, they can make a choice to collect evidence but not report. And they will hold that evidence for up to 20 years at the KBI. And so then, you know, maybe 10 years down the road when that person is ready to report, that evidence is collected. Now with kids, it's a mandated report, but I think this is another place where kind of the media does a disservice, because you'll see things on, you know, Law and Order or whatever, that's like, oh, the rape kit was even worse than the assault. That's not the case. We have amazing forensic nurses. They can stop and take a break. At any point, the patient can say, you know what, I'm done. I thought I wanted to do this. I don't want to do this anymore. Even a kid, it's not mandatory. So we try to kind of take the mystery out of that for people, so that is a resource that is more accessible. And then our Child Advocacy Center is fantastic. So if you guys haven't had a chance to go and tour the CAC here, I would highly, highly recommend you do that. Child Advocacy Centers from across the country come here to see what we are doing here. Our office was in their building for about 5 years. I might be a little biased, but I think they're amazing. The exploited missing child unit of the police department, the internet crimes unit are all housed in that building, as well as DCF social workers, and then the Child Advocacy Centers, child and family advocates and therapists. So it puts everything under one roof for our kiddos. So in theory, they go one time, tell their story one time, and then everybody that needs to see that can see it. They have recorded interview rooms and all kinds of things. So for the professionals, it puts everybody across that multidisciplinary team in the same place. So it's really easy to collaborate. And then for the kids and families, they're not hopping from place to place and re-traumatizing and retelling that story over and over again. So we'll always be a big cheerleader for them. So a couple of quick things, maybe to leave you guys with. Oh, there we go. Went too far. So this was the Fresh Start bags that I was talking about. So this one up here would be like a teen or adult female bag. This one would be a kid's bag. So you can kind of see we do full-size hygiene. We're really big proponents of dignity, and what you give somebody says something about what you think of them. So nothing in those bags is used. They don't have my cat hair. They don't smell funny, right? They're brand new. They have the tags on. We do full-size hygiene. We're trying to kind of create some sense of stability, dignity. It's not going to fix everything. It's an overnight bag of clothes, but it's a start, right? Let's get you a hot shower, get you something to eat, get you a change of clothes, get you feeling a little more human. And then we'll start talking about, you know, what comes next. So again, super easy way to donate or, you know, set up a donation drive, things like that. Come in and pack the bags. I'll show you this room in our building. We moved into a new building in January, so we have a lot more space than we did before. So this room behind me is our Fresh Start room. So you can see everything in those bins is organized, it's color coded. I've had kids as young as 7 and 8 come help pack bags because it's kind of dummy proof. You just kind of go down the list and grab the things, and you know, if you know your colors and you can read, you can put a bag together. So it is a really easy way to come in and volunteer with us. So. And then the last thing that I will leave you with, if you are interested, we have a mobile app that you can download. It doesn't take up a lot of space, but it has a full interactive resource guide of things all across the state. So drug and alcohol treatment, homeless and runaway youth services, DV shelters, all kinds of things, not just related to trafficking, but all kinds of different things. We know that when we go into the schools, our kids, we're there for a couple of days, and then we're gone. And so again, ideally we want them to go to a coach or a teacher, or the counselor at school or whatever. But if they're not going to, we want to still make sure that they have access to those resources. And then for our kiddos in care, they move around, right? So I might have a kid in class this week and next week their foster placement changes and they're in Southeast Kansas, right? So we want to make sure that that they have access. It's also just a really cool, easy thing to throw on your phone and have it if you're, you know, you're like, I know she said something about something, but I don't remember what it was. It's probably in the app. So you can also contact us through it. It's a really easy way to kind of it's got some red flags and warning signs and things, but that resource guide is super, super helpful. We built it out initially for the kids, but we found that it's been really useful for our law enforcement partners, for our social work partners. So yeah. So I threw a whole lot at you real fast. What questions can I take from you?
Yeah, bathrooms are the place, lavatory stalls are the place that everybody
Mhm.
has to go, whether you're under someone's power or not.
Yep.
Do you have any kind of like magnets or that give information or?
We have them as a poster.
That you get restaurants and schools to agree to put up in every stall?
Yep. Yeah, and we have them in some places around town. We'll provide them for anybody that wants them. But yeah, bathrooms are great. And you guys will see, like, if you've flown in the last few years, you'll see the human trafficking hotline is posted in almost every airport bathroom. And that's a great resource. Here locally, it routes through like Kansas City and then back down. So if somebody's in imminent danger, I just tell people call 911. If it's a kiddo, you can call the exploited missing child unit directly. If you're just like the butterball turkey thing, right? I got a question, or this house over here is kind of weird and I'm not really sure what's going on or whatever. And you want to do something that's not, you know, an immediate danger kind of thing. The trafficking hotline is great, but here locally, we have great law enforcement that works with this issue. They work really closely with us. They're very victim centered in the way that they work with our victims. So I feel comfortable. That's not the case everywhere, but we have really great folks here. So yeah, but yeah, we have, they're like a 8.5 by 11 poster, and we give them to the schools, and they're in some of the different clinics around town and things like that. But yeah, anybody that wants one, we'll get them out. Yeah.
This days, Wasa used to have shoe cards. Little cards with the safe place number on them. And I always had to stamp with them in every exam, which I would see them.
So if you didn't hear, she said WASAC, which is the Sexual Assault Center, has cards that have their information, safe place. The Children's Home has safe place cards. You'll see them at like Quick Trip and things like that at the registers and stuff. We take those to the schools with us. We typically do carry WASAC's cards and things with us as well. So we're really spoiled here in Wichita and Sedgwick County. I do a lot of training around the state where you get out into Western Kansas and it is a desert of services out there. And so we're really, really lucky here. There's still a lot of gaps and a lot of holes, and nothing happens as fast as I want it to or as easy as I want it to, but we're really fortunate here in Sedgwick County compared to a lot of the state for sure. But yeah.
So you just mentioned about the state, but what about nationwide? I'm sure there's similar organizations in all kinds of cities. So are you network? What's unique about Wichita? What do you see as common everywhere?
So his question was kind of nationwide. What is this? Are we networked? We, as an organization, we are kind of hyper-focused locally. Now, that being said, we do work with some different agencies around the country. And then my advocates, there is a network of like vetted housing and shelters and organizations across the country that they have access to. So if we need to refer somebody out of state, maybe for their safety, or maybe they have family in another state or things like that, there is some networking of that goes on. This looks different from place to place. It looks different in the Midwest than it does, you know, in New York City or LA or Vegas, right? Looks different on the borders at the border states. A lot of people think about this in terms of, you know, what does this look like in Eastern Europe or Asian countries and things? And again, it looks different place to place depending on cultural norms and, you know, what's legal, what's not legal, all those kinds of things. But at the heart of all of it is that exploitation, right? It's seeing other people as less than and seeing them as property and a means to what the perpetrator wants, and dehumanizing people. So that's kind of the same across the board. Yes.
So I worked with young women in a different part of the United States, who would be considered trafficked. And most commonly, the situation that I saw was that there would be two minors who maybe were traveling together or more, often though a couple. And so in those situations, we have two kids, they often both come from a traumatized background, they're both vulnerable folks. One of them is female, and so she is more able to earn an income through various means that are obviously legal, but then her significant other technically is her trafficker, even though he's also a minor. And that might make her not wanna look for services, right? And there might even be coercion intermittently in that relationship, because there's often domestic violence involved in those relationships.
Right.
Do you guys have a way of like parsing out those kind of cases and helping those folks so that those young people can come forward for help? Because I would see those young women not wanting to come forward, and they probably don't view their significant other as someone who's victimizing them, and depending on the particular moment in time, they probably.
So I'm going to summarize this down to really short versions for anybody that's listening on Zoom. If we have two minors, right, that are maybe traveling together, one of them is essentially trafficking the other, but they may not see it that way, right? They may see it as, you know, well, this is the one of the two that can make the money. If it's a male-female couple, it's easier for her to make the money, but he's controlling things. But he's also vulnerable. Is he a victim or a perpetrator? It gets really tricky, right? We see girls that have been trafficked that then start to traffic other people because they know how to do it. They know how it works. They may be being controlled by a pimp or trafficker until it's a terrible term, but there's kind of a middleman, you know, where you've got your trafficker, you've got your middleman person that is recruiting, and that's typically a younger female because they're more easily trusted. So if that's, yes, Shalane Maxwell. So if that's the person that is, and I won't comment on her because I think that's a different situation, but if we're talking about, you know, younger people, if that person that is now recruiting other people is under the control of a pimp, they're being victimized, maybe this is a way that if they recruit other people, they get a little less abuse. They don't get beat up as often. They don't have to have sex with as many different people. It's a protective factor, right? Is that person in the middle a victim because they're being victimized from above? Are they a perpetrator because they're perpetrating on the next level below? Or are they some mix of the two, right? There's not an easy answer. And so they're both, right? In a lot of cases, they are both. And so I think one of the things that, you know, we try to do, and again, I'm not law enforcement and I'm not on the prosecution side, but what they try to do is look at it situation by situation, right? We've had young people that have been charged with trafficking because they have made that switch to, you know, I know how this game works. I know how to make money. I'm not going to be the one that does it, but I know how to recruit other people and send them out and make them bring me the money back. And it's heartbreaking because a lot of time, most of our pimps and traffickers come from the same kind of vulnerabilities that our victims do, right? Doesn't excuse the behavior, but that's, you know, they're coming from a lot of the same vulnerabilities. There's not a black and white answer, you know? The only thing, well, maybe not the only thing, one of the ways to kind of think about this is like with domestic violence, right? So if you grow up in a home where you see your dad beat on your mom every day, and then you grow up and beat on your wife, do you get a pass for that? No, right? We can see where the victimization started and how that led to that. So it's very difficult from situation to situation, and they really do try to look at them case by case and kind of pull apart like what's actually going on here. And in most cases, especially with minors, they're going to do everything they can to try to make that rehabilitative if that's possible. I have all kinds of thoughts and opinions on the systems and the things, and maybe I should stop talking. And it's one of the things too, even with our adult survivors, like we don't ever tell anybody like, it's gonna be okay. We don't know that. Our systems are broken. There's a whole lot of holes. There's a whole lot of gaps. You know, the best that we can do is meet people where they're at and do the best that we can to try to help person that's right in front of us with what we can.
Could you say just a little bit about rehabilitation? And what is the, what is, no,
So the question was, can we talk a little bit about rehabilitation? Yes. So what I can say about that is the earlier in the victimization that we can intervene, the better chance somebody has of coming out of that, if that makes sense. It is a weird draw back to the drama, the money, the, you know, all of the things. And, you know, I think it's really easy to sit back and go, well, if they were rescued, why would they go back to that? Right. But if you think about somebody that has, you know, that abuse and all of those things have been rampant in their lives, their whole lives, what we hear sometimes is, well, at least this I can control, or at least this I'm getting something from it, right? It was happening to me anyway. My stepdad was doing this to me for 10 years before, you know, at least this way I'm getting something, or at least this way I'm in control. It's really hard to untangle from a lot of the coercion and the manipulation. So the earlier we can intervene, the better chance we have. But we also, for us as an agency, we have people show up, disappear, show up, disappear, show up, disappear. And our doors are going to be open till the 100th time, if that's how many it takes. Because there's a drawback to, you know, if that's the only way you know how to provide for your babies or keep a roof over your head, right? So I wish I could give you a, you know, 97% of the people that come to us, everything gets tied up in a neat little bow. It's just not the case.
does rehab involve psychotherapy? Does it involve and it can involve, I know it can involve several levels of emotional help or emotional support. That's what I was wondering. You know, are there therapists that just send people, kids too, or I mean, child therapy is difficult anyway, and so you know, are there those resources here in town?
So the question was about therapy for both kids and adults, right? So yes, so our child advocacy center has therapists on staff, and then they also have folks that they refer out to as well. For us, we have, through one of the grants that we have, we used to have a full-time therapist on staff, and she changed roles. She went to go work with school-age kids, and so when she left, we went back to our grant funder and said, hey, can we do this a little bit differently? Rather than going out and hiring another therapist, can we do this on a contract basis? So we have 4 therapists that we work with now that all have different specialties, modalities, scheduling availability, different personalities, you know. And so that way we can help kind of steer our clients to what is going to be best meet their needs. There's a lot of different schools of thought on, you know, how to help quote unquote rehabilitate somebody. There's a lot of, I don't know why, but the movement for several years has been these like 2-year residential programs. We're not a housing provider. So we refer out, we have folks that, like I mentioned, Family Promise earlier. We've had good luck with some of the, what do you call them? Like the Oxford House type recovery houses, things. A lot of our clients have past history of addiction, things like that. All of that to say, we really try to meet each person where they are. So we have clients that come to us literally out of a hotel room the night before they came in contact with law enforcement, and law enforcement referred them. We have other people that come to us that have been out of that life 10, 15 years. And they're like, man, all of this stuff happened years ago. I've never really had a chance to deal with it. Things are a little more stable. I think I'm ready to unpack some of this in therapy. So, and we really try to just, I was going to use the analogy of like a menu, right? Like, here's what we have access to. Here's the things we know about that we have connection to. What if this makes sense to you? Where are you trying to go? And how can we kind of help make those connections? I had somebody ask me one time, and I still cringe, how many people have you rescued? 0. I've never rescued a single person. I've watched a lot of people rescue themselves and gotten to be part of that. But that's our role. We have connection, or we have knowledge about things that maybe they don't, that we can say, hey, do you know this exists? Or does this sound like something that's helpful? Great, let's make that connection for you. But we get to meet people kind of all along that timeline, and every single person is so different. Everybody's experience is so different. There's not a one size fits all fix. I mean, we're all very different, right? If I told all of you, you're going to go on a diet tomorrow, that'll look very different for every person in here, because one, I'm not going on one, right? So we just get to meet people where they are. But yeah, I mean, we try to wrap around with whatever, substance abuse recovery, different modalities of therapy, connection to housing, job skills, education resources. We've had clients go through and get their GEDs, all kinds of, go back to college, all kinds of different things. So it's very different for every person. Yeah. Short answer to that is I don't have all the answers. So I let them tell us what the answers are, and then we go try to find the resources as best as we can. Yeah.
So a question that's in the news so much right now with all.
I gotta go.
Yeah.
It's my bedtime.
Positive young women or so that were trafficked basically by FC and all these people, all these highly wealthy individuals, including the president of the United States, who were at parties where this abuse took place. Are these prosecutable at the federal level, or does it all have to be done at the state level? So in other words, would it have to be, if we've had a Kansas girl who was at these parties?
So
among the ones that have come forward.
I'll answer that in just a little bit broader sense of that.
Okay.
So the question was kind of around at what point is something federal versus state? And I will say, even in our cases here, our US attorney and the DA they work really closely together to look at cases where sometimes if it is a federal case, but because of whatever, again, I'm not a lawyer, right? If there's certain factors where they know our state statute has more teeth, they will let them run it as a state case, even though it might have federal implications. Or if they can't get something to go through on the state side, but it's got a federal nexus, maybe they cross the state line, or cell towers being in different states, like sometimes they can pull or credit cards being in different states, they can pull, but they work really closely together to figure out how to do that best. And I know there's a different process on whether or not the victim has to testify on the federal side versus the state side. And again, I'm not the expert on that, but sometimes if you can't, maybe maybe your victim took off, right? They could still prosecute it on the federal side, even without a victim testifying. And again, I did not go to law school, so please don't quote me. It depends whether it's kids or adults and what the crime is and all that kinds of, and again, not all of these cases are going to get tried as a human trafficking case. A lot of times, even though it is human trafficking, there's multiple other crimes that have happened. And so they'll kind of pull together what they know they can get prosecuted. Now on the Epstein side of things, girl, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be a wealthy person, because who knows right now. I would love to say that, all of that will go through the way it's supposed to, but I don't know. To be determined, I suppose. Yeah. Any other questions? I kept you guys past my time. Well, thank you guys so much for, one, for feeding me and letting me hang out with you. I do have, I've got some little deals that have our contact information on them. And like I said, we just moved into a new building in January. We're over at Douglas and Ida, like right behind where the anchor was. So if you have an interest in coming and seeing us and seeing what we do, be happy to give you a tour. All right, thanks, guys.